The civil wars of the 1640s and 50s, that struggle for power between Parliament and the King, are usually collectively called the English Civil War, but that name isn't accurate. There was a lot of conflict beyond England, so some prefer to call the conflicts the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, that is, England, Scotland and Ireland. In many accounts, Wales doesn't get much of a look in. When the Civil War is mentioned in the context of Wales, a response I've heard is, well, not much happened here, did it? Oh, there was that battle in St. Fagans. And in actual fact, it is true that the great decisive events took place in England. But there's a lot of conflict here in Wales, and there were several clashes that could rightly be called battles. The wars saw many castles in Wales besieged and bombarded. Large parts of the country changed hands several times. Some local Welsh leaders changed sides. A few did it more than once. And at one stage we even had a Germanic prince as the president of Wales. And notably, this was a time when the world's first propaganda war broke out, with the Welsh a prime target for abuse. The conflict was primarily about political power. King Charles I needed money for his war with the invading Scots and to deal with the rebellious Ireland. Parliament wasn't inclined to provide it without very tough conditions, but Charles wanted to rule without Parliament's interference, as he thought God must surely have wanted. And religion had a complicated part to play in the wars too. After the Reformation of the previous century, the church had become austere. Charles preferred ornate churches and formal ceremony. Some in Wales liked this, while others thought it a dangerous step towards Catholicism. Religion in Wales had its own character at this time. Some didn't much care for the Puritanism that was growing in England. Many dreaded invasion from Catholic Ireland or Spain. A further complication was that the king's own wife, Henrietta Maria, was a French Catholic. In 1642, Wales was, nominally at least, a stronghold of King Charles. That means most of the wealthy landowners supported him. But there had been decades of poor harvests, taxes were high, and it's likely that most ordinary people probably didn't much care who ruled in faraway London. And the population of Wales at that time was less than that of Cardiff today, fewer than 400,000 people, and the great majority of them spoke only Welsh. But there was one part of Wales that was to cause a lot of problems for the king. That was South Pembrokeshire. It was a stronghold for Parliament. It played a very big part in the conflicts within Wales, eventually requiring Oliver Cromwell himself to ride down to Pembroke to sort it all out once and for all. As the two sides slid towards war, medieval Welsh castles that had fallen into disuse or had become no more than grand homes were repaired and strengthened. The militias that existed in Welsh counties were beefed up and new regiments of soldiers were recruited. King Charles turned to the wealthy landowners in Wales for financial backing. He sent his son, Prince Charles, the future Charles II, to visit Raglan Castle to meet the local great and good and raise funds. William Seymour, the first Marquess of Hertford, became the supreme leader of all the king's forces in the west of England and South Wales. In the late summer of 1642 in North Wales, Sir Thomas Salisbury had the task of raising a regiment of 1,200 men. It wasn't easy finding them at harvest time, but after a lot of arm twisting of the local gentry, enough servants and other workers were found to make up the number. Welshmen were involved in many clashes in England, particularly in the Marcher County areas, but it was the force raised in North Wales that was to see the first pitched battle. Welsh soldiers joined with a royalist army that met Parliament's forces at Edgehill, Warwickshire. This clash of the inexperienced had no clear victor. However, William Herbert, the MP for Cardiff, was killed. It seems that the Welsh at Edgehill were poorly trained and very badly armed. Some were reported to have had no muskets, pikes, or swords. They went into battle with nothing more than the farming tools they had brought with them. Pamphlets were published in London ridiculing the allegedly cowardly performance of Welsh soldiers at Edge Hill. In fact, there was much mockery of the Welsh in general, with references to sheep, a diet of toasted cheese, and non-English names that were much mocked. 4 fictitious soldiers graced one cartoon. They were ridiculed and called, rather oddly, Up Morgan, Up Shinkin, Morris, and Taffy. Welshmen also fought in various other engagements in England, and their performance depended on which side was writing the account. One report stated, "Another account highlights how the Welsh troops were given the most dangerous job. It seems they were regarded as expendable." But despite this apparent carnage, Wales continued to support the king, and by the end of 1642, things weren't looking too bad for Charles. But it was obvious that there would be a hard struggle ahead, and Wales was to play an important part.